Right, greetings. Well, hello everyone. I can't believe a whole week's gone past. We're back on a Sunday here at the Philosophy Club in the middle of France. In France here they call this the Great Return. You know, everyone's going back to school and all the holiday makers go back to Paris. So it's got that sort of end of summer feel. And also the weather's just turned, which I don't mind because we had ridiculously hot week earlier on, really boiling hot. So now it's gone back to like normal. This is like a Scottish summer and I feel much more comfortable with it. Drizzle, cool temperatures, the odd bit of sunshine. So what happens here in the middle of France is you get like a few days of that and then it goes back to really hot. So I think part of philosophy is to enjoy whatever nature throws at you, find something good in it, enjoy it whilst you can, and then you know it's going to change anyway. So, okay, what we're going to do today with my guests here in the Philosophy Club is we're going to play a little game, a sort of, I mean, I've often thought of turning the periodic table and the tarot into a kind of board game. Anyone wants to help with that, please get in touch. It could be done. It would be a lot more instructive than Monopoly, for God's sake, and most other board games. But anyway, what we're going to do is they're going to choose two tarot cards of different gods, guided by destiny. And we'll see if there's any conflict or how the relationship is between these different deities, both historically. Was there any influence of one on the other or whatever? Where did they come from? And also what's going on at the moment? Are there current followers and worshippers in a conflict situation of there? Or, or are they really friendly and cooperative? So we'll have a look at the subtleties of that, and I will refer to the periodic table at that point. So this is using both the periodic table and the Tarot of the Gods as a tool for conflict resolution and peacemaking, which is, after all, my job. I'm an expert in peace building, particularly interfaith peace building, and I think that's rather needed at the moment, not least in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, but also I noticed the Secretary General of the Organization of the Islamic Conference has just appealed for Burma, which is a Buddhist country, or Myanmar, to let the Rohingya Muslims go home. They were all kicked out, became refugees, and so there's a Buddhist-Muslim conflict going on. And there are many of these kind of interfaith conflicts going on in the world that my job is to try and stop, and I want to stop them all by next week's Philosophy Club, please. So I hope you're listening carefully. And okay, let's see where we go here. Go for it.
You first.
Round one.
Okay. Allah.
You've got what? Allah. Okay, there we are. Allah, chief god of Islam. Thank you. Lisa, go for it.
6 of air, Hermes.
Huh. Very interesting. That's a cool start. Can I move these aside? And if you put the deck off, I'm going to be using this. Well, let's get straight down to brass tacks type of thing. Yes, Allah. So in the periodic Tarot of the Gods, I've I've done a sort of mental leap and associated Allah with the Moon card, which is number 18 of the Major Arcana. The thinking behind this is, very deep and thought out, because the moon was sacred to the ancient peoples of the Middle East, and it is symbolically important in Islam in that a moon is often on the top of each mosque. The moon is the flag symbol for Turkey and many other Muslim nations. The Muslims have a lunar calendar, so they always start the month when they see the sighting of the new moon. And where Abraham came from, and Abraham is very much esteemed in Islam, Muhammad loved Abraham and thought he was following in his footsteps, was a place called Haran up in northern, well, southeast Turkey now. And the moon was sacred to them as well. So I don't think it's fanciful to say that the moon is the secret symbol of Allah. Also, the moon changes all the time, which is like Allah. He's always changing. Now you're up, now you're down. Now you're in, now you're out. But stays the same because the light is eternal. So, and of the Muslims on the planet, of which there's, about 1 billion, a lot, and I've got many friends who are Muslims, and part of me is definitely a Muslim. There are tragically quite a lot of conflicts involving Muslims. One thinks of, India, Pakistan, and the conflict in India between the Hindu BJP nationalists led by the RSS, a sort of secret fascist group. One thinks of the Indian militarization of Kashmir, which my friend Piotr Balcerowicz, Polish academic, has published 3 books studying the abuse and torture of Muslim civilians in Kashmir. And one thinks of the horrendous invasion of Iraq by America and UK and other forces on an absolutely fake pretext. They had nothing to do with 9/11, and yet suddenly, the media went full out, let's get the Muslims, which was, to me, that was an insanity. So yes, poor old Muslims getting clobbered in quite a few countries. Let's look at the next card now. Hermes, the 6 of air. So this is fascinating. I mean, if you read my Tarot of the Gods properly and you study this card in depth, I mean, Hermes began as a Greek god. He was the messenger of all the other gods. So Hermes was the one that was thought to turn up. If you were really in trouble, Hermes would come and help with a message from the gods. And he appears in Greek mythology as turning up in the nick of time. He had kind of very acute hearing and sight, so he could see things hundreds of miles away. And he was also like an intelligence agent or spy for the gods. For instance, when Persephone was stolen and taken to the underworld by Hades, and Demeter got really upset, it was Hermes that found her, because he could see, oh, she's down in the underworld. And then he was sent as a messenger to negotiate a deal. So Hermes is like a cosmic intelligence agent of the gods. And when the Greeks got to Egypt, they took their love of Hermes with them. And when the learned Egyptians and the learned Greeks used to chat in Egypt, as they did for centuries, they'd ask the Egyptians, who's your wisest god? Who's like your intelligence agent? And they all said, well, that's Thoth, isn't it? The guy that invented the alphabet. He's the genius among the gods. Oh, well, then he must be Hermes, they said. Yeah, he's probably Hermes. So they made a deal, like an interfaith peace treaty, that the Greeks would call Thoth Hermes. And that's the origin of what we call the Hermetic mysteries. Now, the Hermetic mysteries really are the Thoth mysteries, but it's got this Greek overlay. And not a trivial thing. I mean, the Greeks were very profound thinkers, obviously. Plato studied in Egypt, and they loved Egypt. They still do. When Christianity became the sort of official religion of Egypt, the pagans who wanted to go on worshipping their pagan gods didn't know what to do, because their temples were all shut down forcibly, their books were being burned, they were being persecuted, some of them were being killed. And Hypatia, one of the learned intellectuals, was literally hacked to pieces by a Christian mob. They didn't know what to do, so they turned to Hermes and said, oh, we'll just be worshippers of Hermes, Hermetic teachers. And they kind of went into the underground a bit, became esoteric teachers. But it lived on because of that. They preserved the mysteries. And they wrote down their sacred texts, the Hermetic Mysteries, which I have a copy of, and which I've done. I'm working on a commentary on. Haven't had time to finish it yet, but it's on the Green University website. The reading of the whole text. I now need to fill in the commentary. Now, a friend of mine, a guy called, I think he's Kevin von Bladel, great name, has written a book called the Islamic Hermes. He's discovered that a lot of Muslims also appreciated Hermes, because Muslims come in all different shapes and sizes. Some of them are really deep intellectuals. That's the kind I know and work with. And they wanted the true wisdom behind everything. They didn't want a sort of, kind of cut-out, cardboard-type religion for kids. Yes, Islam can be like that, and it's great for kids, and you learn how to do the 5 pillars and all that, and you get taught the basics, and that's great. But when you reach a certain intellectual maturity, you want more. So that's where the Islamic Hermetic tradition comes in. And these Muslim scholars were commenting on the Hermetic texts. They had copies of them. They were writing books about them in Arabic, saying, this is not incompatible with true Islam, because true Islam is about finding wisdom, enlightenment for all mankind. So of course they'd look to ancient wisdom sources. They even went further. They associated Hermes with a mysterious prophet called Idris, who is mentioned in the Quran. And they said, look, Idris, that's Hermes. So it's okay to be a Muslim and follow Idris as well, because he was another prophet. We follow Muhammad, he's the latest, but Idris was one a long time ago. And so was Jesus, and so was Moses, and so was Abraham. So the Muslims argued that if you're going to be faithful to Hermes, that's fine. What Muhammad did was update the teachings. So there is a whole reading of the Quran, which is a Hermetic reading of the Quran. And that's what I put into my commentary. I've tried to explain that Islam isn't about fighting all the other religions. It's about complementing, fulfilling, and adding to them. And Muhammad, this is where it gets really interesting. Muhammad was absolutely, undoubtedly learned in many esoteric sciences. He was an unlettered prophet, but how do you get to be a prophet is with very, very deep introspection and reflection and prayer. And I've revealed in my commentary on the Quran that he himself had travelled much more than people think. He'd been to Damascus, he'd been to the Yemen and the south of Arabia. I'm absolutely certain he'd been to Hira, which was on the borders of Iraq and Arabia, where there was a flourishing multicultural civilization which was in touch with ancient Persian culture. There were Zoroastrian influences, there were Manichaean influences, which was a prophet who'd lived in that region 4 centuries before Muhammad, and left lots of followers. They were Gnostic thinkers, and that also left traces on Islam. There were lots of Christians, esoteric Christians in Hira. Now, and the Arabic alphabet that the Quran is written in was first developed in Hira, based on Syriac Aramaic writing. Scholars, bless them, who specialise in this stuff, have said, look, this is where the Arabic alphabet came from. And they were in touch with traders from Mecca and Medina. So, just working out, guys, I mean, Muhammad must have been going to Hira and sitting in the cafes and chatting all night to learned people about, what is God? What is Christ? What's it all about? Who are the real prophets? And I can always hear him thinking the Quranic worldview is taking form in his mind as he's going to Hira, as he's going to the Yemen, as he's going to Damascus. And that was a 15-year period when he was the husband of Khadija, who was his patron and sponsor. He worked for her. He had 15 years of study and travel. And those are the lost years of Muhammad. If I live long enough, and somebody wants to help, I'll do a whole book about this, because scholarship has totally and utterly neglected those 15 formative years of his life. Now, I'm saying that during that time he definitely heard of, if not Hermes, he'd certainly heard of Idris, which was a common name among the Arabs in that culture. And in his mind, all these ancient wisdom prophets were all one great, amazing galaxy of superheroes, like the Knights of the Jedi. And he was the latest one on the block, turning up like Luke Skywalker to take on the evil forces that are. And he therefore invoked them all as his backup team. I mean, wouldn't you? I mean, it's a great, great concept. So I don't see there should be a conflict at all. I hope I've explained enough. If you didn't know any of this stuff, well, okay, it's in the domain of scholarship. This stuff isn't taught much. I've always taught it because I'm a very generous scholar. I taught it when I was working at the Muslim College with the late Dr Zaki Badawi, one of the most learned Muslims I've ever met, PhD from Al-Azhar University. And he knew all this stuff. He said, yeah, precisely, Thomas, absolutely. That's why we love learning. And we have a Muslim college which was set up in London where I used to teach. And there are other institutes, like that. But there's not enough. And the trouble was, when the West decided to weaponize Islam and turn it into like a jihad against whoever they didn't like, they funded and supported the least intelligent of the Muslim jihadis, the sort of soldiers, the thugs. It's like going to the Appalachian Mountains and giving dynamite sticks to the born-again Christians that have never read anything but the Bible. They weaponized the least intelligent and sophisticated among these Muslims, which was, I believe, a fatal moral and geopolitical error. And then, we've seen the chaos that's happened since. What we should be doing, and should have been doing, and I was saying we should be doing at the time, is work with the leading intellectuals of the Islamic world, the true saints, sages and Sufis, the people that know that Allah and Hermes are actually, they've already signed a peace treaty centuries ago, and we should be working with them and creating a peace matrix throughout the entire Middle East. And also with Israel and with the Jewish thinkers, because the Jewish Sabbats know this as well. Obviously, they've been deeply into the Hermetic mysteries for many centuries, and the wisest among them know that Allah is not actually a threat. Allah is just the Aramaic or Arabic name for El, which is their God too. It's the same God. Yes, oh, and there's one final twist to this story, which is really quite fun. Haran, as I say, was where a lot of these mysteries came from. It's thought that, I'm pretty sure Muhammad went there on pilgrimage, and it was on the pilgrimage routes, and it's where Abraham came from. He was born there, not in Ur of the Chaldees, but in further up, Sanlurfa it's called, in modern day southwest Turkey, southeast Turkey, sorry. Anyway, they stayed pagan even after Islam came, because what happened was Muhammad came, gave his teachings, said, everyone rally round, we're the Knights of the Jedi, come back, we want to unite everyone. Christians, Muslims, Jews, everyone can live in peace, but we'll be the government, if that's okay, Like Muhammad wanted to kind of have the final say on stuff, because he felt he was the latest revelatory message and therefore should update stuff. And a lot of people thought, well, okay, that's all right, we can go with that. Christians didn't have to stop being Christians. Jews didn't have to stop being Jews. They could carry on. And many of them did, and accepted that Islam was a sort of update. It's like Microsoft Word comes out in different iterations. I think we're on to Microsoft 10 or something, or Windows 10 or 11. You don't have to upgrade to Windows 11. The old one still works fine, but there's all kinds of new features in Windows 11, which eventually one might want to update to. Same thing with these religions. Anyway, the people of Haran wanted to stay pagan, because although they appreciated all these, Semitic religions flying about. They wanted to stick with their indigenous traditional wisdom and their worship of the moon god, actually, and the moon gods, who was called Sin, S-I-N, up in Haran. So, a Muslim army turned up, and the deal was that you either, it was simplistic, but either accept what we're saying or convert to Islam, or prove that you're a people of the book. And the point is the Quran is very generous. It lets everybody get in to the hut of civilization as long as you've got a sort of sacred book. So the army turned up, the caliph or the general shouted up at the walls and said, well, people of Haran, are you going to convert to Islam, or are we going to attack you and kill you all tomorrow, convert you by force? Or do you have a book? And they said, well, think about that overnight if you don't mind. Can you come back this time tomorrow? And they went off and all their elders got together. And of course, as pagans, they didn't really have just one book. They had all books. They had the trees, the sky, the sun, the moon, each other, beauty, love, everything, air. How can you possibly explain this to a ravaging Muslim army that makes you choose between being a book person and being, a Muslim? Anyway, they came up with a brilliant thing. And when the Muslim army came back the next day, and this is a true story, the guy yelled up again, go on then, people of Haran, have you chosen? What's your book? Oh yes, Caliph, we've chosen. Our book are the Hermetic Mysteries, which they must have had a copy of, because they were good pagan scholars among them. And that was enough for him. He said, well, who's this Hermes? Oh, it's Idris. Oh, Idris, oh, that's fine then. And they were all let off. And they were just classed as, Hermetic mystery followers. And I love that story, and it's a true story. And it shows you how tolerant, genuine Islam is. Contrary to all the kind of fake propaganda that's been spun against them. But we need to get back people who realise all this, who know this stuff, back into being rectors of the universities of the Islamic world, setting up. I'd like every university in the Islamic world to have a peace studies department, please. I'm happy to come and advise how it should be done, because Islam is a religion of peace, as my commentary on the Quran has made plain. So anyway, that's how Allah and Hermes can. If only we could get these two together, we could get this planet to live happily ever after. Because the Hermes people are the pagans, right? And there are lots of pagans that have demonized Islam. They go around saying, oh, we hate Islam, they don't like women, they're horrible, kill all the Muslims, A lot of these white supremacists roaming around Kentucky and places, they're all very anti-Muslim. Trump was weaponizing them. Even in Putin's anti-Islamic circles, which obviously, the Russians have been fighting Muslims for about 400 years, 500 years, in Afghanistan and in Syria, where they've gone down and destroyed cities. They also don't understand that there needn't be this war going on between pagans and Islam, because there's a peace treaty already between Allah and Hermes. It goes right back. So please wake up and realise that. Look into this. And Putin's so-called intellectuals that, like Dugin, these people simply haven't done their homework. They need to urgently be given a copy of the Tower of the Gods should be translated to Russian, please. And it should, they should study it and apologise to the Muslims for their demonisation program. And apologise for their invasion of Afghanistan, by the way, which caused all this stuff. And they still haven't managed to demine Afghanistan. Instead of invading Ukraine, Russia should pull out of Ukraine tomorrow and give all the money they'd save to the Afghans to try and get their country back to being a normal place where you don't walk about and get blown up. There's still more mines in Afghanistan soil than any other country on earth, thanks to the Russian invasion. So anyway, there's my little. That's exciting, I think. An example of why this Tower of the Gods works for peacemaking. Right, okay, let's do the next couple.
Ahura Mazda.
The big boys are playing today. Ahura Mazda, thank you. Yes. Yes. Well, Ahura Mazda is the 20th of the great arcana, major arcana, standing for judgment. In the normal tarots, it's called the card of judgment. But Ahura Mazda is the lord of the universe. In the ancient Zoroastrian worldview, Zoroaster was another prophet in the lineage. Muhammad must have known about Zoroaster, but his name doesn't occur in the Quran. But by implication, he says again and again in hundreds of verses, I'm just the latest of all these prophets. Every tribe has had a prophet, says the Quran. And that includes Zoroaster, who taught about Ahura Mazda, which means the Lord of Wisdom, and who is responsible for the Last Judgment. Zoroastrians believe that Ahura Mazda is going to sort out the good and evil at the end of time. There'll be a Last Judgment, and all the evil will be kicked off the planet. The good will inherit the earth and live forever. It will be a rebirth. So this card stands for judgment, followed by rebirth. And it's an amazing card. I love Zoroaster's gathas, which are his hymns, which he gave, like inspired channeled verses, predating the Quran by over 2,000 years. The gathas are probably chanted in Balkh, which is in northern Afghanistan, in about 1700 BC. They're some of the earliest scriptures known to man's religious history, and they're very humanistic. They appeal to our common sense, our intelligence, our innate conscience, our goodness, and that if we do that, humans, we will defeat the forces of evil, which are demonic forces, whose strength comes from the lie, or lies, dishonesty. That's all the strength they have.
Where on the table?
The Zoroastrians are in the sort of purplish colours, 120, 121, 122, which are the Persian faiths. Just you've got pink for Chinese faiths, so you've got these. And Zoroastrianism per se is 122, periodic table. There are branches of Zoroastrianism, all of which celebrate Ahura Mazda. 120 has Mithraism, because Mithras was regarded as the key helper to Ahura Mazda. He's so busy he can't, because he's got other planets to run as well, right? Whole universes. So Mithras is like his assistant, like an archangelic deity that helps Ahura Mazda. You've got Zervanism, which is a branch of Zoroastrianism that emphasized endless time and eternity. And then you've got other offshoots. Then Manichaeanism, which I mentioned before, which definitely influenced Muhammad and took root in Hira and elsewhere at that time. And Augustine, by the way, it's his mother's saint's day today, Saint Monica. Well, Saint Monica was always grumbling at Augustine because he was a follower of Mani. He was a lover of Gnostic esoteric stuff, was Augustine. And he found in Mani for 15 years, food for his soul. It was very sophisticated stuff. Mani believed in reincarnation and Gnosticism and the gradual working up to enlightenment. Because, by the way, Mani had also heard of Buddha, and he had a pantheon of heroes, did Mani, that included Buddha, Zoroaster, Jesus Christ, Moses, Abraham, everybody that he'd heard of. I don't think he'd heard of Lao Tzu, although later his teachings got to China. We know there were Chinese Manichaeans. So it's really interesting stuff, this, for religious studies people. We didn't know much about all this in Europe until a Frenchman, Anquetil Duperron, in the 18th century, went to India on a ship. He had to join the French army to do so. but he was going as a scholar. But they would pay your passage if you were prepared to go in the army. He got in the army. When he reached Pondicherry, which is the French bit of India, he got to know the commanding general and kind of confessed, actually, really, I'm a scholar of languages. I came here to study Zoroastrianism. And the guy said, look, I could have you clapped in irons for this, but actually set him free and gave him some money to go up to Bombay, where all the Parsis were living, who were the Zoroastrians. I'm going to Bombay, hopefully, if the gods sort out everything in February next year for a big peace conference. I hope there'll be lots of Parsis there. So Onkhetil Duperron brought back the Gathas of Zoroaster. He translated them into French.
The what?
They're called Gathas, Gathas, which means hymns, in Avestan, which is the language of Zoroaster, which is a very ancient form of Persian. And I know several Zoroastrian personal friends of mine who, it's still flourishing. There's about, in the whole of history, probably 100 million have been Zoroastrian. Estimated now only about 150,000 left, like proper Zoroastrians. There's a temple, if anyone's interested, in Hampstead, which is a few doors away from the Freud Museum, which I always think is quite a cool synchronicity, really, because Freud was fascinated by ancient religions, but I think it came to be there after Freud had gone and died, sadly. But I used to take students, actually when I taught at the Muslim college, I took some students to the Freud Museum, and we would go to the Zoroastrian temple as well, because I was teaching interfaith approaches, within Islam, and I think that's an important topic. So, okay, that's Ahura Mazda. Now let's look at the next one.
6 of Earth, Dionysus.
Blimey, wonderful. The 6 of Earth, Dionysus. It's like the completely opposite, really, in some ways. Gosh, yes. Because Dionysus is very much the Greek mystery god. He appears as Bacchus in the Roman guise, and there is a separate card, I believe, to Bacchus, and there's Liber as well. But as Dionysus, his religion was a mystery cult, in which plentiful wine and mystical insight and ecstasy were part of it. Dionysus believed in ecstasy, and he said it's not just up for the prophets to have this, it's up to everyone, the poor guy, the working class man, the unemployed, the street, the homeless guy. Dionysus said, they're all mine, bring them to me, right? And he would give out his little bit of ecstasy, a bottle of red wine keeps you happy, at least for a day or two. And that was his offering to the world. He brought wine as a sacrament for our soul's liberation. And it's interesting, I discovered today, by the way, doing Saints of the Day, that Saint Monica is the patron saint of alcoholics, because she herself was as a kid. She had a really sad childhood, so as a teenager. So I think Dionysus didn't advocate alcoholism. He wanted people to have a little glimpse of ecstasy, but not sort of try and stay there all the time. It's fantastic to have, half a bottle of wine or whatever from time to time. It gives you a little glimpse of heaven. But then you get on with the real world, get on with your work, do your stuff sober. And Dionysus was happy with that. He didn't want people to just totally flake out and become drug addicts. But some people, of course, went too far. And it's difficult to get the balance. Some people misuse sacraments like alcohol or LSD or psychedelics or marijuana, whatever. All of those come within Dionysus's compass. He wants people to have all these adventurous excitements, and now it's a big thing in new religious movements. People doing Burning Man, they're all